So it was a very big day in federal prison. They were serving mole, which I'd never had before, but I worked in the kitchen earlier that day in the morning and realized based on the smell of mole, I wasn't a fan. And I wasn't even willing to try. Then my bunkie came up to me and he said, "Hey, let's go down to the chow hall for lunch." I'm like, "I'm good. I ran, I worked. I'm going to cook out of my locker here, man. The microwave's open." He's like, "Please go down to the chow hall with me. I really want your mole." I'm like, "Fine." We walk in, go through the line, get my food, put my mole in front of him. And as I'm ready to leave, some dude taps me on the shoulder. I'm like, "Hey, man, I've been in prison for 6 months. Why are you tapping me on the shoulder?" And it was an executive, a white collar guy who had just surrendered, who said, "Hey, I just got here. I've been reading your daily blog. I would really love some advice on how to adjust well. Can we talk?" I'm like, "I'm happy to talk, but not inside of this chow hall because I don't like mole, nor do I like the smell. Let's just go for a little walk around this dusty dirt track." And then he's like, "Okay, well, I'm done eating. Let me knock on the table." There's this belief that when you're done eating in prison, out of respect, you should knock. Some do. I never did because I didn't. Nobody ever got upset. So we're walking around this track, and I said, "Well, how long are you here for? You appear to be in a pretty good mood." He's like, "Man, I'm in a great mood. I mean, I just got sentenced to 9 years in prison." Like, 9 years? You appear to be in a great mood. 9 years? What happened? He's like, "Yeah, but 100% my appeal comes through, man. 100%. Like, I got some weight to lose. I've been reading your blog. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to get fit, maybe write a book or blog like you. This is great. I'm expecting my appeal to come through soon, but this can be great. It's going to be great. I want to learn from you." I'm like, I want to learn from you that you're serving 9 years. You're in great spirits. I hope your appeal comes through if you are indeed innocent. But I do want to ask, what happened? Why did you leave? Why are you here? And his answer is going to tie into exactly why Bob Menendez was convicted in 3 days on all accounts of accepting bribes and cash and gold bars from Egypt and Qatar. And he's looking at many years in prison, no different than this executive who had mole, just ever getting to prison and knocking on the table, was looking at 9 years in prison. Now, thankfully, I don't think Menendez is looking at 9 years, but the stories align. And I think once you hear the story, you're going to see why Menendez is going to fit in so well in prison, why it's going to be so easy for him to fit in prison. Now, when I spoke with this executive, he told me that he got 9 years, went to trial, lost, and it wasn't his fault, but he was convicted of, apparently the government said, running some small Ponzi scheme. And what's crazy, it was only about $1 million. And in the white collar crime world, $1 million is not a ton of money. But here he was literally stealing from old people, the government said. And when he would take in money, rather than grow his fund, he would invest in new office furniture, TVs. He would travel, all under the idea that he needed that to grow the business and raise more money, really to be successful. And as crazy as that sounded, he actually thought it was legitimate. Of course, the jury did not agree. It sounds insane, right? That someone would go to trial and think they would prevail under the idea that they were taking in money, not spending or investing it accordingly, but rather looking to grow their office and take private jets to bring in more money under the idea that if they're successful, they're really going to grow the fund and everyone who gives them money benefits. But that's how people rationalize choices. And there are, of course, some lawyers out there, despite the overwhelming evidence, who will compel someone or encourage someone to go to trial, which leads to Menendez, smart guy, been in the Senate for a very long time, to think rationally that he could prevail with gold bars and cash is absolutely insane. And to hear that his lawyers say they're stunned and shocked after the verdict, if anything, they only should have been stunned and shocked if they prevailed, because most people lose. So why could this happen? And why will he be so comfortable inside a federal prison? There are indeed sycophants, people who are very powerful, who have people around him who tell you exactly what you want to hear. That is no doubt the case with Menendez. And of course, there are some people who would rather serve a measurably longer prison sentence, and claim their innocence rather than accept responsibility, move on with their life, and get a measurably shorter sentence. Had he accepted responsibility and said, "I violated my oath of office, I'm going to resign from the Senate, I'm going to work to pay back any money I illegally obtained through my corruption. My highest value is ensuring that my wife, Nadine, who's dealing with cancer, doesn't ever stand trial." Had he taken that approach, 18 months, probation, home confinement, some prison time, but not the 4 or 5 years that he's looking at. But again, there are some people who would rather serve a very long federal prison sentence and maintain that innocence rather than fully accept responsibility. It's true, and it's not that uncommon. And of course, there are some people who are just utterly delusional, who believe they will prevail. Now, I will tell you, having served time in federal prison, there's this myth you hear, Shawshank Redemption, where that character Red and Andy Dufresne said everyone's innocent. The lion's share of people in prison fully accept responsibility. That is such a prison cliche. The lion's share of people fully accept responsibility, want to make amends if they created victims, want to pay them back. At least the majority of people who come into our community who plead guilty, even people who go to trial and lose down the road, say in retrospect, I understand the government's version of events. I don't totally agree, but if I had it to do over, I would accept responsibility. I would not delay the inevitable. I wouldn't have spent all this money going to trial. And because I exercised my right to go to trial, I got 7 years instead of 2. Indeed, we know people in our community who go to trial, lose, they get 7 years instead of 2, 9 years instead of 4, 3 years instead of probation. And I am sure that the senator, I presume to be soon to be former Democratic, now independent senator, is going to have a great deal of regret over how he handled this experience. Now, let me tell you what happens next for him. Besides holding out hope and you saying all the same boilerplate stuff that anyone who goes to trial says, I'm going to prevail on an appeal. There are major appellate issues. I never violated my oath and code of office and things like that. You're going to expect him to continue to say that. And holding out hope for an appeal is a good thing, but it doesn't change. The wheels of justice will continue to roll because in the next 30 to 60 days, Senator Menendez will sit for a probation interview. Now, this person who I mentioned I walked that track with just after he got to prison didn't prepare for the probation interview, didn't do anything to think he could influence that probation interview. Part of the reason he got 9 years in prison, and I suspect Menendez, like so many high-profile people who do very little to mitigate, will have a horrific probation interview because many people who go to trial and lose work under the idea that I don't want to say anything that could jeopardize my right to an appeal. So an autobiography or life story or any lessons learned, what he could have done differently, what he'll do moving forward. Many defendants convicted at trial don't tend to convey that message. They outsource it to the lawyer who's paid to articulate that message. And I presume as high-priced lawyers will articulate it well, but it doesn't change. The probation officer in advance of his interview is going to do what? It's a rhetorical question here, people, because I'm talking to myself. What's going to happen follows. The probation officer is going to speak with the prosecutor, Damian Williams, who said really horrific things like years of selling his office to the highest bidder have finally come to an end. So you can expect the probation officer to be influenced by Damian Williams. You could expect the probation officer to be influenced by the fact that he failed to accept responsibility. If anything, he sought to blame his wife, which clearly could have been a strategic move because based on her health condition, they've delayed her trial indefinitely. That could have been strategic. Blame her. She's never going to go to trial anyway. That will help me get an acquittal. That was clearly the strategy. And of course, she's ill and I hope she recovers as quickly as possible. The probation officer will also review his history. There was a criminal corruption trial in 2017. He had acquitted, so this wasn't his first imbroglio through the criminal justice system. So there's going to be a history of evidence for her to review. And it ain't good because he was just convicted in 3 days by a jury of his peers by doing some really bad things. He should immediately, presuming he wants the shortest possible prison sentence, be thinking, how can I influence this probation interview? How can I influence the person who's going to write this report? And by not doing that, he needs to own the reality that he's just like choosing to stay in prison longer. That's all. Defendants that don't do the work are choosing to stay in prison longer because even if you are convicted at trial, you should still absolutely have a very extensive mitigation plan. Does he? Probably not, based on what I've heard, because he doesn't show any inclination to try to influence the court positively other than claiming to be a victim. R. Kelly made a huge mistake by not mitigating and sharing trauma from his childhood. He relied on the lawyers. I can speak to myriad people in our community who have been convicted at trial and still got a measurably shorter sentence and kept their appellate rights, but they articulated through their own words and efforts why they are worthy of leniency. I don't suspect he's going to do that, which is why his probation interview will probably last, hold on, about 9 minutes. At the advice of counsel, I have nothing to say. At the advice of counsel, I am not comfortable answering that question. At the advice of counsel, there's nothing more that I feel comfortable saying. I'm going to prevail. I'm an innocent victim here. I'm being made an example of by corrupt government. Yes, that's what happened. And I'm good. Thank you. 9-minute interview. So what will happen is the probation officer is going to write a report that is, it's going to be no good. It's going to fillet him as an unrepentant manipulator who didn't do anything to convey why he was worthy of a shorter federal prison sentence. And of course, at the sentencing hearing, you can expect his judge to open up this way. Have you read the probation report? Yes. Do you understand the probation of the probation report, Mr. Menendez? Yes. Did you review it with your lawyer? Yes. And it's stunning how many defendants answer yes, 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 and then think, why does the judge keep talking about this probation report here? Because I didn't prepare for it. I didn't review it with my lawyer. I quickly scanned it. There were some things that were wrong, but hey, no big deal, right? The probation officer doesn't sentence me to prison. The judge says, is this like a big deal? Should I be worried about this probation report because the judge keeps talking about it? So many defendants don't understand. The probation officer at the end of that report is going to recommend how long the defendant should serve in prison. That probation report will help dictate what programs he is eligible for in prison, what prison he will go to, early release eligibility, supervision after he leaves federal prison. Any medical issues need to be disclosed with help of getting treatment. If he's sick, he would go to a specific prison. Programs may send him to a specific prison. So it's stunning and sad how many defendants fail to properly prepare for the probation interview. But when you feel like you've been victimed and you're a victim and you've been wronged and you're ultimately going to prevail, there's very little need to prepare because ultimately you're going to be like, everything's going to go your way. So like, what's the point? I don't understand it. The unfortunate reality is most people not only lose at trial, but also lose on an appeal. And by virtue of the bad planning, they get a measurably longer federal prison sentence. And that's exactly what you could expect his judge to say to him at sentencing. You were convicted of 16 counts of bribery, extortion, acting as a foreign agent. If anyone should be held to a higher standard, Mr. Menendez, it is you. And for these reasons, not only am I going to sentence you to, it could be 5, 6, 7 years in federal prison. Think about that for a moment. His wife is ill. He has children. Had he handled this better, he could have been home with his wife and kids or been home measurably quicker. But because of his denial, excusing, sycophants around him, telling him exactly what he wants to hear, he's put himself in a position in the twilight of his life to serve 5, 6, 7 years in federal prison. He will have that do-overs and regrets. But as I wrap up, I will tell you, and the reason I titled this video, whatever I titled it, Why He'll Fit Right in Prison, is because just like he's got those sycophants right now, those political advisors and people who tell him exactly what he wants to hear, he will find that small sliver or snippet on the wrong side of federal prison boundaries telling him that same exact thing. The lion's share of people, as I said, accept responsibility, prepare, work, create, prove worthy of the love and support of their family. No question. I don't care what you hear on television, people. I've been to federal prison. I know. Most dudes are awesome. They work hard. They want to make amends. No question. There is like maybe 1%, however, of the Menendezes of the world, or this executive who I watched eat moly his first day in federal prison as we walked around the track while he's serving 9 years, blaming and excusing other people, blaming the people who gave him money, his investors turned victims. Menendez, like he found the sycophants now, he will find, I promise you, I guarantee you, he will lead those same sycophants, the 1/10 of 1% in federal prison, who will sit around him at the chow hall and say, like, so what was it like being a senator? Like, tell me about that. And very powerful. Who did you meet? The president, this and that. Like, incredible. You got wronged. Was it your lawyers, the judge? They were out to get you. I understand you said at one, you were a minority and they're after you because of that. And it's totally normal because of your background that you would hide cash and gold bars like in your wall or under your mattress. That's like totally normal, like totally support you. Absolutely. If I had the opportunity to have gold bars and stacks of cash, I too, can I call you Bob or is it Mr. or should I still call you Senator? How should I approach you here, Bob? I'm sorry, Senator. How should I? Of course, Bob, I would have the stacks of bars and under my mattress in the cat. There will be dudes who will come up to him in that predictable sycophantic fashion who will seek to just want to be friends with him because he's on TV and he was a senator and he was powerful. And for that reason, the 1/10 of 1% of dudes in federal prison will make Senator Bob Menendez, as my printer goes off, Senator Bob Menendez feel right at home. And that will ease or assuage his adjustment to prison. I will tell you the hardest day for him will be if and when he loses that appeal. Someone's texting me right now while I'm on a live Zoom call. I don't know why. I can assure you the very down day for him is if he eventually loses that appeal. And that's how I'll close. It is good to maintain hope, and it's fair to maintain your innocence. Though if lawyers and the evidence makes clear that you're going to lose, there's value in clearly accepting responsibility, even if you don't fully agree with the government's version of events, for the sake of your family and for the sake of how long you will serve in federal prison. But I will say there are many guys who walk around that track and hold out hope that they're eventually going to prevail on an appeal. And if and when they lose, that's like when the real reality of the federal prison sentence can really kick in. And I know that from experience in serving time with guys, 5 years, 9 years, 3 years. They're like, yeah, I went to trial, I lost. I know that I'm going to win. So in those instances, when they are convinced they're going to win, they never fully adjust to prison because they think at any moment they can be released. Then if they lose, the reality sets in. I got 5 years left, 6 years left, 7 years left. And that can be very, very difficult. So he has a journey ahead of him. He should prepare for his probation interview. He should create a mitigation strategy that shows why he's worthy of leniency. I presume he'll collect 100, 200 character reference letters, even though that's far too many. I hope he speaks at his sentencing hearing, presuming it's the right message. His lawyers, I presume, will ask for a minimum security camp. Could be the camp at Fort Dix, not far from his home in New Jersey, though the Bureau of Prisons, due to security issue, could ship him all the way across the country. Indeed, they tend to punish people at times, whether they tell you or not, who exercise your right to go to trial. I don't suspect that they'll take him into custody when he's sentenced. He may be out for a while pending appeal, but there is no doubt he is getting sentenced to prison for much longer than it could have been, and the reality of what's to come. He should also begin preparing not just for sentencing, but for life in federal prison, the complexities that follow, avoiding disciplinary infractions, staff and prisoners, as I mentioned, who may be sympathetic to him. The goal is to not make matters worse, and hardly a day passes with someone going to prison with good intentions who gets into trouble, an iPhone, not doing their job, associating with the wrong person, and just like that, they're in the hole, and they're getting transferred to a higher security prison. For the sake of his family, I hope he makes better decisions moving forward and recognizes that he has an opportunity to do better, which begins with beginning to mitigate for the probation interview and ultimately his sentencing. That's 16 minutes. I'm going to wrap it up and get back to work. Thank you. Bye-bye.